Welcome back to another chapter in the legendary tale of Hercules. Tonight, we journey to the land of the Amazons, where the hero must face not monsters or beasts, but a challenge far more delicate. This is the story of the ninth labor, the quest for the belt of Hippolyta. After 8 labors that tested every fiber of his being, Hercules had earned a brief respite. He had defeated the Nemean lion and the Hydra. He had captured the golden hind and the Erymanthian boar. He had cleaned the Augean stables, driven away the Stymphalian birds, captured the Cretan bull, and tamed the man-eating mares of Diomedes. Each task had pushed him to his limits. Each victory had cost him dearly in sweat and struggle. But King Eurystheus was far from satisfied. The king, safe in his palace, feared Hercules' growing legend. With each impossible task completed, the hero's fame spread further across the known world. Songs were sung of his courage. Poets composed verses about his strength. And Eurystheus, petty and jealous, could only think of new ways to humble the son of Zeus. It was the king's daughter, Admete, who inspired the ninth labor. She had heard tales of the Amazons, those legendary warrior women who lived far beyond the borders of Greece, near the shores of the Black Sea. Among their treasures was a belt of extraordinary beauty, worn by their queen Hippolyta. This was no ordinary accessory. The belt had been a gift from Ares himself, the god of war, a symbol of Hippolyta's authority over all the Amazon tribes. Admete desired this belt above all things, and so, with the casual cruelty of the privileged, she asked her father to obtain it for her. Eurystheus saw his opportunity. He summoned Hercules and commanded him to travel to the land of the Amazons and return with the belt of Hippolyta. The king smiled as he gave this order, certain that this task would finally prove too much for even the mighty Hercules. The journey to the land of the Amazons was long. Hercules gathered a company of heroes to accompany him, for even he knew better than to venture into such distant lands alone. Among his companions were Theseus, the great hero of Athens, and Telamon, brother of the mighty Ajax. Together they boarded a ship and set sail across the wine-dark sea, leaving the familiar shores of Greece behind. Days melted into weeks as they sailed eastward. The rhythm of the oars, the creak of the ship's timbers, the endless whisper of waves against the hull became the music of their journey. They passed islands shrouded in morning mist, their shores dotted with ancient temples. They navigated through straits where the water ran swift and treacherous. They saw dolphins racing alongside their vessel, leaping through the foam as if leading them onward. At night, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Hercules would stand at the prow, gazing at the constellations, thinking of all he had endured and all that still lay ahead. The sea air filled his lungs. Salt spray kissed his face, and for these brief moments between trials, he found something approaching peace. They stopped at various ports along the way, places where Greek was spoken with strange accents, where the customs differed from those of home. At one island, they encountered a king who welcomed them with food and wine. At another, they had to defend themselves against pirates who thought a merchant vessel would be easy prey. These pirates learned too late that they had attacked a ship carrying the strongest man in the world. Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached the land of the Amazons. The country stretched before them, wild and beautiful, with rolling hills covered in tall grass that swayed in the wind like waves on a green sea. Forests thick with ancient trees bordered wide plains where horses ran free. In the distance, they could see the smoke rising from the Amazon settlements. The Amazons were unlike any civilization Hercules had encountered. Here, women were the warriors, the rulers, the decision-makers. They trained from childhood in the arts of war, mastering the bow, the spear, and the sword. They were riders without equal, able to shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while mounted at full gallop. Their society had no need for men except as occasional visitors, and they guarded their independence fiercely. When Hercules and his companions came ashore, they were met not with hostility but with curiosity. Amazon scouts had spotted their vessel while it was still far from shore, and word had spread of the strangers' arrival. Warriors on horseback surrounded the Greeks, their weapons ready but not raised in immediate threat. The hero identified himself, speaking his name plainly and without boast. The Amazons knew of Hercules. His fame had spread even to this distant land, carried by traders and traveling bards. The warriors escorted him and his men to the home of their queen. Queen Hippolyta received Hercules in her great hall. She sat upon a throne carved from dark wood, adorned with the furs of beasts and trophies from battles long past. But it was not the throne that drew the eye. It was the belt she wore around her waist, gleaming even in the dim light of the hall. Crafted of gold and studded with precious stones, it seemed to glow with a light of its own, a divine radiance that spoke of its maker's power. Hippolyta herself was tall and strong, with eyes that missed nothing and the bearing of one accustomed to command. She regarded Hercules with interest, this man whose legends rivaled those of her own people. Around her stood her most trusted warriors, women who had proven themselves in countless battles, their faces marked by scars earned with pride. Hercules bowed, showing respect as one ruler to another, though he wore no crown. He explained his quest with honesty, telling her of King Eurystheus and the labors imposed upon him, of Admete's desire for the belt, and of his need to complete this task to move closer to his redemption. He did not threaten. He did not demand. He simply asked, knowing that honesty was the only currency that might purchase what he sought. The hall fell silent as Hippolyta considered his words. Her warriors watched, hands near weapons, waiting for their queen's judgment. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, heavy as honey, slow as amber. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, and somewhere far away, a bird called out, its cry echoing across the plains. Then Hippolyta spoke. Her voice was clear and strong, filling the hall with its resonance. She said that she had heard of Hercules, of his strength and his courage, but also of his honor. She knew the story of how he had been driven mad by Hera, how he had killed his own family in his madness, and how he now labored to atone for that terrible crime. There was no judgment in her words, only understanding. The Amazons, after all, were intimately familiar with the capricious cruelty of the gods. What happened next surprised everyone present. Hippolyta declared that she would give Hercules the belt freely. She saw no reason for conflict between them. He had asked with respect, had traveled far on a quest not of his own making, and she admired the strength it took to submit oneself to such trials in the name of atonement. The belt, though precious, was ultimately just an object. Her authority came not from what she wore, but from who she was and what she had earned through her deeds. Hercules felt relief wash over him like cool water on a hot day. For once, a labor might be completed without bloodshed, without struggle. Perhaps this was a sign that the gods were finally showing him mercy. Perhaps his long road of suffering was beginning to ease. But the gods, and Hera in particular, had other plans. Hera had watched Hercules' progress through all his labors with growing fury. Each success galled her, each triumph was a fresh insult. She despised this reminder of Zeus's infidelity, and she refused to allow him any peace. When she saw that Hippolyta would simply give Hercules the belt, that he would leave the Amazon lands without the pain and difficulty she craved for him, the goddess decided to intervene. Hera descended to earth in disguise, taking the form of an Amazon warrior. She moved among Hippolyta's people, whispering poison in their ears. She told them that the strangers were not what they seemed. She said that Hercules planned to kidnap their queen, to carry Hippolyta away by force. She spoke of the arrogance of men, of how they could never be trusted, of how these Greeks would betray Amazon hospitality with violence. The lies spread like wildfire through dry grass. Warriors who had been merely cautious became suspicious. Suspicion hardened into certainty. Certainty transformed into rage. Soon the Amazons were arming themselves, preparing for battle, convinced that their beloved queen was in mortal danger. Inside the hall, Hercules and Hippolyta were concluding their peaceful negotiations. The queen had removed the belt and was preparing to present it to the hero. They spoke of their respective lands, of the differences and similarities in their cultures, finding common ground in their shared understanding of duty and honor. Then the doors burst open. Amazon warriors flooded into the hall, weapons drawn, faces fierce with protective fury. They saw their queen standing before Hercules, the belt in her hands, and they misinterpreted everything through the lens of Hera's deception. They believed they were witnessing the moment before an abduction, and they rushed forward to prevent it. Chaos erupted. Hercules' companions, seeing armed warriors charging, drew their own weapons in defense. The Amazons, seeing this response, took it as confirmation of the Greeks' hostile intent. Hippolyta shouted for her warriors to stop, trying to explain that there was no danger, but her voice was lost in the tumult of battle cries and clashing steel. Hercules found himself in the worst situation imaginable. He did not want to fight these women. They had done him no wrong. Their queen had shown him kindness and respect. But Amazon warriors were attacking from all sides, and his companions were fighting for their lives. If he did nothing, his friends would die. If he fought back, he would betray the peace that Hippolyta had extended to him. The hall became a whirlwind of combat. Theseus fought off 3 attackers at once, his sword moving in desperate arcs. Telamon stood back to back with another Greek hero, fending off spear thrusts from mounted warriors who had ridden right into the hall. Everywhere was the ring of metal on metal, the shouts of warriors, the thunder of hoofbeats on stone floors. Hercules tried to reach Hippolyta to get her to safety, to somehow stop this terrible misunderstanding. But in the press of battle, in the confusion and the fury, tragedy struck. Hippolyta, trying to force her way through her own warriors to stop the fighting, was caught in the clash. The details of what happened next are lost to the chaos of the moment. Some say she was struck by a weapon meant for Hercules. Others say she fell in the press of bodies and was trampled. Still others claim that Hercules himself, fighting off multiple attackers, struck her without realizing who she was until it was too late. However it happened, the result was the same. Hippolyta fell. The queen of the Amazons, who had offered friendship and peace, who had been willing to give freely what others would have died defending, lay motionless on the floor of her own hall. The sight of their fallen queen froze the Amazons in their tracks. The fighting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Warriors lowered their weapons, horror replacing rage on their faces. In the terrible silence that followed, the only sound was the ragged breathing of those who had been fighting moments before. Hercules knelt beside Hippolyta, but there was nothing he could do. The greatest strength in the world could not undo what had been done. He had come in peace and left ruin in his wake. Once again, despite his best intentions, despite his efforts to do right, he had caused death and suffering. The cruel irony was not lost on him. He had killed his own family in madness, and now he had killed a woman who had shown him nothing but respect and kindness. The belt lay on the floor where Hippolyta had dropped it, its golden surface splattered with blood, its beauty now a bitter mockery. Hercules picked it up, the weight of it far heavier than mere gold could account for. This was the weight of yet another life lost, another soul added to the burden he carried. The Amazons, grief-stricken and enraged, could have killed Hercules and all his companions then and there. But something stopped them. Perhaps it was the genuine anguish they saw on the hero's face. Perhaps it was the knowledge that their queen had indeed intended to give the belt freely. Perhaps it was simply the desire to see these cursed strangers gone from their land forever. Whatever the reason, they let Hercules and his men leave, carrying with them the belt and the weight of what had transpired. The journey back to Greece was somber. No one spoke of victory. The belt sat wrapped in cloth, hidden from sight, as if looking at it would force them to confront what it had cost. Hercules stood at the prow again, watching the stars, but now they offered no comfort. He thought of Hippolyta's wisdom, her strength, her willingness to see past the surface of things to the truth beneath. She had deserved better than the fate the gods had given her. When they finally reached the palace of Eurystheus, Hercules presented the belt without ceremony or words. Eurystheus took it eagerly, his daughter Admete squealing with delight at the beautiful gift. Neither of them asked about the journey, about the cost, about the lives lost in the acquisition of this precious object. To them, it was simply a trophy, a beautiful thing to be possessed and displayed. Hercules walked away from the palace, his ninth labor complete, but the victory felt hollow. Hera had won again, not by preventing him from completing the task, but by ensuring that even success tasted like ashes in his mouth. She had taken what should have been a peaceful encounter and transformed it into tragedy. She had killed Hippolyta as surely as if she had wielded the weapon herself, and she had made Hercules the instrument of that death. But the labors continued. There was no time for grief, no space for reflection. Eurystheus already had his next task in mind, another impossible challenge to hurl at the hero who kept somehow finding ways to survive. And Hercules, bound by his oath, bound by his need for redemption, would face whatever came next. The belt of Hippolyta remained in the palace, worn occasionally by Admete to impress visitors, a golden band around the waist of a princess who never knew or cared about the blood spilled to bring it to her. And in the land of the Amazons, a great warrior queen was mourned, her people singing songs of her wisdom and strength, her memory honored by those who had loved and followed her. As for Hercules, he carried yet another scar, this one invisible but no less painful than any wound made by claw or fang. He had learned that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from monsters or beasts, but from the schemes of the gods and the tragic misunderstandings that can turn friends into enemies in the span of a heartbeat. He had learned that even when he tried to do right, even when he approached a task with honor and respect, the world could still conspire to turn it into disaster. And so the hero moved forward because moving forward was all he could do. The path of his labor stretched ahead, and he walked it one step at a time, carrying his burdens, bearing his grief, enduring. Because that was what Hercules did. He endured. Thank you for joining us on this chapter of our journey through the labors of Hercules. Rest well, and we'll meet again soon for the next part of this ancient tale. Until then, may your dreams be peaceful and your sleep deep and restorative.